that was the most common thing that was being said online by women because they watched The Polygamist and because they saw how stuff unfolded. And while that might work for them, this is the time when I'm gonna come around and tell the guys, by the way, from that series, the one thing I can tell y'all is
the royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who likes his women the same exact way he likes his yogurt. He is also a man who usually includes running his mouth to his cardio routine. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. And as the title itself says, that's exactly what we're intending on talking about in this episode. The polygamist just so happened to have gotten women by the chokehold for a bit, and for the last 2 weeks, that's been like the most major thing that most women have been discussing online. And I intend on giving my thoughts on it because I just so happen to have watched it. And honestly, there's a little bit to say there, but I feel like there's just so much to kind of put there. But even though that's not really everyone's cup of tea, there is still something that I do want to discuss on the episode regarding women and trying to deter men from approaching them, which I feel is also particularly important, especially considering that there was a Nation article that was put up with respect to this issue. So in summary, I can probably say that this episode is about women. And should you like it, should you not like it, should you have a different form of feedback, or should you want to suggest a potential topic and or guest I can or should have on the podcast, then the DMs are always open, the social media links are usually in the description, and should you feel like that's a little too much work, or you feel like maybe you're just a little too lazy or you don't really feel like checking the description, you can always listen all the way till the end of the episode where I usually mention the social media there. But all in all, the DMs are always open and I would be more than happy to check them out and handle them accordingly. Now, I want to kick things off, and to start, I want to talk about the idea of approaching women. Now, normally for us as guys, we believe that this is something that we should practice and we should learn because, at the end of the day, not unless if you're gay, approaching women is kind of something that you'll probably be spending a certain chunk of your young adult life doing, mainly because you would want to attract a potential mate that you can have a family with, have kids with, but just generally have some sort of relation with. And as such, it has pushed a lot of men to go out, learn to pick up babes, or maybe just try their luck out using whatever tactics that they deem to be fit or whatever tactics they're comfortable doing, all with the same aim of trying to attract a potential mate. Now, in as much as there's nothing wrong with shooting your shot, regardless of whatever kind of guy you are, there does seem to be an issue of women receiving unwarranted, at least according to them, requests by guys who they seem to not be interested in. And it seems like there's a lot of guys that will be hitting on them, and that's something that they haven't been particularly comfortable with, more so around areas where they may probably be working or they may frequent, where they know that they're going to meet some of these guys quite a bit. And as such, they have now chosen to elect different methods to try and deter men, of which they have employed a number of them over the years. But the more recent one that was being talked about is how apparently we now have young women who are wearing wedding rings as quote-unquote a pest control measure. Now, I'm not gonna lie, when I saw this title as a quote-unquote pest control measure, it just kind of felt very, very bad. Like, it's a very vulgar way of putting it. But, well, considering that it's babes that are saying it, of course, it'll just be looked at as, oh, but that's exactly what it feels like, blah, blah, blah. But if guys were to say it, but anyways, this isn't about the guys in this particular case, it's about the ladies. Now, I'm going to read the small bit that was posted up on IG, then I can get into my thoughts on it because I do have some. And from the Nation, it says, and I quote, "Some career women are now wearing rings. These are not engagement or wedding rings, nor are they fashion accessories." Nancy Washira told Nation Lifestyle, and I quote, "I am a single woman, but I've been wearing this ring since January this year. I am doing so to avert unnecessary disturbances from men." End quote. They say the rings help set safe boundaries, deterring chronically flirtatious men and allowing them to focus on work, with fewer interruptions from men. End quote. Okay, now looking at this particular post and this argument, I can actually understand where they're coming from. Okay, actually I can't, but I'm gonna try and understand where they're coming from, because I never really, or at least I wouldn't have really thought that it's that bad to the point where you have to put on a wedding ring. But considering that some women seem to see this as a valid option, then it's alright, it's cool. But now, to make matters a little bit more interesting, when I looked through the comments, as I always like to with a lot of these posts, a ton of women were over there busy saying, who snitched, who snitched, who snitched. And the thing is, I find it particularly interesting that they're coming on to say who snitched. Yet, and I kid you the hell not, I saw this posted up on a couple of babe stories, and they were saying, or at least they were asking who snitched, yet they were posting up on their stories. I don't know if you noticed the contradiction in that, which is particularly wild. How do you ask who snitched, yet you are openly putting it out there and asking who snitched? Which is practically telling the men that follow you to check it out, because you also do have male followers. And while I can't say that every single woman that saw this post decided to post it on their stories and asked who snitched, there are about 102 people, at least as of the time of this recording, who decided to repost this story. And I'm guessing probably about 90 to 95% of them were women. So assuming 90 people have reposted this story, so there's a good chance that tens of thousands of other men could have also seen this. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but that's like complaining about snitching while snitching yourself. Wild. Absolutely fucking wild. But anyways, that said, okay, now that I think about it, maybe it might seem like it's a drastic measure, but considering that there are some women that get hit on a lot by guys, or at least get advances a lot from men, maybe because they're beautiful, or they're light-skinned, or they look petite, or, any other reason, maybe it could work as a measure. I can get why that would seem like the case, especially if you're in a place where you work with a lot of people and a lot of those people are men. So a very good example is whenever you look at some of these corporate environments, if it's a department that is having a lot of men or is just fairly mixed, you probably might find that a lot of those guys might hit on you if they don't have very strict sexual harassment policies. So of course I can get why that would be the case. But besides that, I find it a little bit hard because it's not unless if you are in a not so nice part of town, that guys would just be trying to hit on you all the time. I'd even argue that maybe a bunch of them are doing it not necessarily because they get that many advances, but because close to them there's maybe 2 or 3 different guys that they're not that interested in, and instead of just telling them no or turning them down in whatever which way, they would much rather avoid the interaction altogether by wearing a ring. I think that would probably be the most common reason. Not that I don't think women are approached, but rather I don't think there's that many women that are approached that much after a certain span of time. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of these women that could be getting these advances and they are anywhere between 20 and 35. But you can't tell me that they're being approached by different men every single day, all the bloody time. I just find it statistically improbable, in my opinion. But then again, I could be wrong about that, but I feel like to some degree, while it's not the best thing, I also don't think it's too bad of a thing, the fact that there's a lot of guys approaching. People in the West are complaining that men aren't approaching them. There's women that are beautiful that will hop onto TikTok, hop onto IG and complain that they don't get approached by guys. And a lot of that was as a result of the Me Too movement. This is the US, this is the UK, this is so many different parts of the world. And then in Kenya, it's there's all of these guys that are approaching me and I just don't like it. It kind of shows you that there's always going to be problems on either side, which is why whenever you look at some of these problems, you realize that it's like everyone is complaining about everyone all the time. Because when you look at it, I'm sure there's married women who complain that there's young single women that are running after their husbands. When you look at said young single women, they're gonna complain that they're busy getting approached by every single guy. Then when you look at the single guys, they're going to complain that they're losing out because there's married men in the market that have kind of messed shit up. And then when you go to the married men, they'll say that for them, they don't have anything too serious. It's just that everyone has it in on them and they're already struggling with enough trouble at home as is. And then you kind of look at it, a lot of this is just people complaining that the other side is making shit worse for them. So for this one, I'll probably just say, you know what, it's fine, it's cool. If it works for the women, that's fine. The only issue that I can foresee is, considering that people have been becoming a lot more okay with crossing certain boundaries over time, this is bound to be the next boundary that they'll probably cross next. Because back in the day, if you said that you had a boyfriend, guys wouldn't approach. But over the years, more and more guys have been comfortable with the idea of pulling another babe's shorty and the fact that there's guys' girlfriends out here that are sleeping around. So in a sense, you saying that you have a boyfriend today doesn't really mean as much. Nowadays, of course, the women have now started moving towards I married and blah blah my husband blah blah. So considering that there are women, married women, who have been known to sleep around, would it be too hard to assume that they could also have that boundary not really seem like much? Because there's a bunch of guys that will look at it and be like, that really doesn't mean shit because I've bagged married women before. Because if that was the case for people who are in relationships but weren't married, then I'm guessing that it's just the next thing that might end up breaking down. Because there's a lot of people that are starting to lose a lot of care for these boundaries, so they don't mind crossing them. But with that said, if it's a method that's working for the women right now, let it work for them. Then maybe if it doesn't, they'll find something else. But either way, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode, which I'm sure there's some of you guys are probably just waiting for me to get to. So yes, here I am, here it is. I am going to talk about the polygamist. Now, I'm going to be very honest with y'all. This wasn't something that I chose to do out of my desire to do it. Like, it's not like I was like, oh my goodness, I've been wanting to watch The Polygamist ever since people started talking about it. Honestly, it's because there were a ton of women that were posting about The Polygamist and people started making memes about it. And considering that there was quite a bit of hype around it and the fact that people were talking about how there was a lot of toxicity and relationship stuff that was going on, I figured I might as well just check it out because, I might as well find out what all of this fuss is about. Now, with that thought process in mind, I figured let me look for some time, watch The Polygamist, and I did, and I'm not gonna lie, that show is full of toxic people. Goodness my. Like, people are gonna talk about how, the problem is this, the problem is that. Everyone's gonna be blaming Jonas in this entire thing. But honestly, everyone in that story, every main character is quite literally toxic in their own way, maybe save for Jonas and Joyce's kids, Menzi and Pume, of which even towards the end, Menzi basically starts turning toxic, or so I heard. And the reason I'm saying or so I heard is because I actually haven't finished the series as of yet. It's just, I wanted to make sure I just did this episode while it is still fresh on people's minds and while people are still watching it and there's still a bunch of hype, because if I do it 2 months later, it really won't carry as much weight. And as such, I will admit I watched probably about almost half of all of the shows, and the rest I basically focused on breakdowns from reviewers, critics, and a little bit of Gemini to tell me what happened so that I can know if my predictions on how each and every one of those characters turning out was actually as I thought initially, of which most of it actually was, because it's like the characters just within the first couple of episodes you can probably figure out how each person is going to turn out, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse, and you can kind of predict it because it's just people going towards lower versions of each other and it transforming them into one kind of person in some way or the other. Like, I feel like that's how a lot of that story kind of was going to turn out either way. But all in all, for those that liked it, it's a pretty interesting series. I didn't get too hooked into it for very long, but I think it's because I haven't really been the biggest fan of that genre of movies and series. But anyways, all that aside, while I watched the series and while I was reading the reviews, I made sure to note down my thoughts on the characters and on the series itself so that I can kind of give my thoughts on it, because as opposed to a lot of the people who watched that series who were women, I decided to watch that series as a guy and as a content creator who talks about relationships, more so from a guy's perspective, so that I can kind of give some explanations that I feel most women probably wouldn't have picked up on as far as that series goes. Now, of course, considering that I'm giving my thoughts on the series, if you haven't watched the series, this is the time when I tell you spoilers are up ahead. So if you don't feel like watching the series, you can just listen to my thoughts on it, and maybe you might get lost, but a lot of these things do apply to just regular everyday life. But if you haven't watched the series and you want to, this is your time to go watch the entire series, and you can come back and you can listen to my thoughts on it and basically critique whether what I'm saying is true or false. Now, I broke these thoughts down into basically 3 different levels. So there is the thoughts that I had for men, there is the thoughts that I had for women, and then there is the thoughts that I had as far as the relationships are concerned. The reason I broke them down is because I just feel like there was a lot to say on either sides of each. So that's why I decided to do it like that. So anyways, without further ado, I know I've kind of dilly-dallied on this for probably like 17-ish minutes. Let me just get into it. So for the men's side, I will start with the one thing that women were saying the most after watching The Polygamist. And they were just saying this online. They were like, as a woman, after watching The Polygamist, the one thing that I can say is dissenter men. That was the most common thing that was being said online by women because they watched The Polygamist and because they saw how stuff unfolded. And while that might work for them, this is the time when I'm gonna come around and tell the guys, by the way, from that series, the one thing I can tell y'all is maybe you should be decentering women. Or to be more specific, you should decenter pussy. Like, this is gonna be one of those ones where it's gonna sound like I'm being a bit vulgar, but let's be particularly honest. If you actually were to watch the series, you would realize that most of the shit that was going down was simply because guys were centering themselves on pussy. Say for Freedom, he was centering on the booze and the drugs, but that's kind of besides the point. Because Menzi, Jonas's son, was centering on pussy, Magesh also centering on pussy, much as he was trying to, stand up for his bro and defend him. Even the minister who was busy preaching about how, him and his wife believe in family and shit, blah, blah, blah. Even he was centering on pussy when he got a chance to. So, for the most part, considering that in some way, shape or form, all of these guys, say for Freedom, were basically centering on the pussy, or, just so happen to be chasing the pussy, then you can clearly see why a lot of these problems that women will blame on men and use to say we should decenter men all stem from the fact that these guys are centering on pussy. So if you can decenter yourself from the pussy as a guy, then things will be much better for you in life. Then the next thing that I would want to say to the men is lust is insatiable, and you need to learn that early enough, or else your life will be very, very complicated. And I say this because for a lot of guys, especially when you're young, from the moment you start going through puberty and everything, falling for the pussy is a very easy thing. And if you engage in it to a point where you lust after it a lot, the moment you start doing much better for yourself, it'll be one of the first things that you'll be chasing. And the issue with that lust is the moment you are going after it, it might seem like it's the thing that you want at that time and that's all you want. But the problem is it's an insatiable desire. So you'll get it once and you'll think you're doing good and everything is all right. Then all of a sudden something else comes up and you want to hop onto that as well, and onto the next one, and onto the next one, and onto the next one. And that insatiable desire is something that over time, as you try to build a life for yourself, if not controlled, can make your life very, very tricky. How many guys out here have 3 kids from 3 baby mamas and they always complain about how they have no peace in their lives? It's shit like that that we need to avoid as men. Or even if you want to have 3 kids by 3 baby mamas, you're doing it on your own terms, the way you want to do it, not just based off of the fact that you are just going and sleeping with every single babe you can. Then the next thing that I can probably say to the man, or at least to the men out here, is the whole statement of the sins of the father become the sins of the son is very true, and not unless if you break away from it consciously, that shit will continue to haunt you. Now, we saw this with Jonas's son Menzi, who was a particularly just nice young kid, and he just had an issue where he wasn't as confident in himself, and the father called him weak. The father beat on him and kind of forced him into a position where he had to become more aggressive, more tough. And the kind of interests that he had, he was told that the only way he can get them was if he became resourceful like the father. So eventually, over time, he kind of turned into some version of the father. So by the end of the season, the guy is basically doing stuff in pretty much the same way the father was doing them, in as much as he'd have probably wished to be different. So as the saying goes, the sins of the father become the sins of the son, and not unless we make a conscious decision not to be that, you tend to suffer the same exact fate. Then the next point that I would probably give is, no amount of pussy is worth your principles as a man. And this one is the one that made Jonas become such a household name that even people who haven't watched The Polygamist know of this supposed Jonas or Jonasi. This nigga banged different women, and it's not like he discriminated on how far, how close, or how he seems to have known these women. Fine, that was the wife, but you look at it, he banged not only his employee but a babe that he knew his brother was having a thing with. Mans did not have any care for bro code. Dude was like, you know what, fuck it, this is a nice piece of ass, I'm clapping it regardless. Mind you, his wife had just given birth, but this guy looked at it and he was like, I'm not letting this pussy go. And as a result of that, Matipa ends up leaving Jonas's brother Magesh and ends up becoming Jonas's mistress up until, I guess, she has twins, and then a bunch of shit goes down from there. Then you look at the son's crush, Lindani. That was the son's crush, but even more so than that, that was his daughter's close friend, if not best friend. This guy still looked at it and he was like, I'm clapping these cheeks ASAP. And man still went and clapped cheeks. This guy did not have any boundaries. He did not set up any principles that are supposed to guard him from screwing just about any babe. So whether it was his employee, whether it was his brother's girlfriend, or whether it was his son's crush or his daughter's friend, he still clapped cheeks. So that in and of itself did make him seem like the villain of this entire story. But the biggest problem here was the fact that the guy just didn't set up any principles that can guard him as a man. And as such, you couldn't entirely respect the guy after a point. Then the next point that I noticed here is your worth as a man may be based on your resourcefulness out in society, but deep down, it should be anchored in confidence. And I bring that out because when you look at Jonas's brother Magesh, when you look at Jonas's son Menzi, that principle holds quite a bit of weight there. Because when you think about it, if Jonas's brother was making a shit ton more money or was equally as rich as Jonas, if he had gone through a situation like that where Jonas had gone and bagged his babe in Shagda, he'd have reacted very differently as opposed to how he did at that time. And you can come back and be like, no, he probably wouldn't. I argue that he would have, because this guy was basically just trying to hang close to Jonas because that was how he was getting money. And it was said before how, he was basically fighting for his brother's scraps because he wasn't as successful as the brother. You can also see this in Menzi because up until he became resourceful, he had a confidence issue. But once the guy got access to the father's wealth and he was doing particularly well in the company, the guy now decides to start screwing Lindani, and the guy seemed particularly more confident at that time. But before all of that, the guy was having a bit of a confidence issue. So, key point, build your confidence outside of everything, and then you can now try to be resourceful and a bunch of other things. Otherwise, if you tie your confidence to your resourcefulness, it'll always be sliding up and down, and there'll be someone that'll make you feel like you are worth less, yet you are not really worthless. It's just they have a little bit more in resources than you do. Then, last but not least, most hoes out here are rotated, so there's nothing new. Matipa was rotated, Lindani was rotated, and I'm not calling them hoes because they're hoes per se. It's just, these babes with this kind of mindset will usually be rotated by roughly about the same guys. So you find that some of these guys might even find out over time that they've been screwing roughly about the same babe. And I know it's a series and there's way more women on this planet than just 2 or 3 women, but oftentimes you find that a lot of these so-called gold diggers tend to be rotated by a couple of different guys. So, there's that. Then let me move on to the section that I saved for the women. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is, regardless of the kind of man that you fuck, your worth will not improve unless you hold yourself to a higher standard. A pretty good example of this was Matipa. Matipa seemed like a particularly smart woman, and yes, she was beautiful, but no one really saw her as anything more than the babe that's fucking the boss, or should I say the babe that's fucking Jonas, simply because she did not present herself in a higher standard than being the babe that was fucking Jonas. So unfortunately, even if she'd have done more, even if the show could have probably shown that she might be good at her job in some way, shape or form, no one would see her as more than the babe that is fucking the boss, or the babe that is fucking Jonas. Then the next point is, if you build your image or your self-worth on public reputation, you tend to lose it roughly about the exact same way. And this was spotted with Joyce, and unfortunately, she went ahead to build this brand of hers based on the fact that she is a married and successful woman. Now, she could have built it on herself being a successful woman, but she decided to bring her family into it, and unfortunately, it seems like the man wasn't really feeling what it was that they were having at some point, and he decided to step out. That in turn affected her brand, and she ended up in a position where she was trying to save her brand more than her marriage, and only after that did she try to at least reconcile whatever was left of her marriage, of which that still crumbled, and she still went ahead to try and secure her brand afterwards, meaning that she cared more about the brand than the marriage itself. Then the next point that I learned was that respect is important to every man. The day you forget that is the day you lose. And I know this one's going to be very controversial, but this one is in relation to Mpume. A lot of the shit that transpired in maybe the second third of the entire series is probably because Mpume decided to talk some shit to the dad. If Mpume did not say any of that shit, if Mpume just shut the fuck up and did not go off at the dad when the dad was going off at her brother, then there's a pretty good chance that the dad wouldn't have strangled the son. There's a pretty good chance the dad wouldn't have smashed shit. And there's a pretty good chance the dad wouldn't have been as physical. Now, I know there's someone that's going to be like, that's bullshit, you can't say that. But given the story as it was in the series, the guy kind of started going down that path. And a lot of that started because this guy was in a situation where his daughter was talking shit to him. So you can call it what you want, but that's quite literally the fact of the story. Then the next point is, you shouldn't come between two people who share a bed, which also refers to Mpume. And I get it, she's a young lady, she's trying to defend her mom from the dad, and she's trying to defend her mom in general, but unfortunately that's something that she just couldn't do. She wasn't in the position to actually do that. She decided to hold a grudge against the dad on behalf of the mom and talk to the dad on behalf of the mom to some degree. Then, to make matters worse, she decides to go and try to talk shit to Matipa, who is his father's mistress. And don't get me wrong, I've never really thought that Matipa was the nicest character out of all of them, which probably meant that she did a good job. But as far as how she reacted to that entire interaction, she was probably the smartest out of the two of them. Shorty straight up said, leave grown folks' business to grown folks, and she chose not to engage with the daughter, which in my opinion was a very wise decision, because why bother yet this is something that is shared between people who share a bed with this man. Like, that wasn't really her place to go. Then, last but not least, no lifestyle is worth turning into a hover. Be content with what it is that you have. And this is in relation to Matipa, who became Jonas's mistress, and also Lindani, who was also Jonas's mistress, and then became Menzies' sort of babe that he's been screwing, and apparently ended up picking a disease, supposedly, or at least it's suspected. Like, when you think about it, the kind of stress that these babes went through just so they could end up where they were wasn't really worth it in the end, in my opinion. And I guess maybe they enjoyed the luxuries of fucking the guy with money, but I've never really seen someone profit all that great, not unless if you were actually the wife of said dude. But, maybe that's just a me thing. But now, with that said, let me just do the conclusion for the relationships. Now, first and foremost, most relationships are mainly kept together by the idea that the two people are going to make it work. This was something that was seen between Magesh and Essie. This was something that to some degree was being kept up by Jonas and Joyce. And to be quite frank, like, people can talk about love, people can talk about communication and yada yada yada, but the desire to make things work by both parties is probably going to be one of the strongest, if not the strongest force that will keep relationships together. Whether typical relationship, whether marriage, you find that the ones that last the longest usually do end up lasting so long because both parties agree that they're going to do what they have to do to keep the relationship together. Then the next one is those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. This one you will find with Jonas and the fact that the father was abusive, he became abusive, and you could probably see by the end of the series that Menzi is going down in that direction. Also, the fucking around, same thing. Then you can also see the case of Matipa and the case of Lindani. Lindani saw who and what Matipa was, and Jonas basically did the same thing with her, and instead of her trying to turn it down, she basically took it up as well and kind of just followed in doing the same exact shit, of which, she just ended up repeating the same exact cycle that was there. So those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Then the next one is, if there's always issues whenever it comes to your relationships, there's a pretty big chance that you're the problem. Okay, so when you look at the case of Jonas, he was the problem. If you want to look at the case of Joyce, you could also argue that she was the problem. If you're looking at Lindani, there's also a case that she is the problem. Like I said, everyone in this series was toxic, save for Mpume and maybe Menzi. But a lot of times, whenever you find that there's a cycle of just shit that's happening, sometimes you might actually find that you might be the main problem in all of it. Last but definitely not least, I want to give a conclusion that can round out this entire series that I try to break down my thoughts on, and say that all of this is entertainment. Quite literally. All of this is entertainment, and the chaos is designed to entertain you so that you can continue watching and talking about it. So please, learn that, relearn it, and learn to live beyond it. Okay? You will see people trying to pick up lessons that they should apply in life whenever it comes to such and such. Guys, I will tell you for a fact, a lot of the stuff that happened in this series, you could probably even argue everything that happens in this series is stuff that won't affect one person, but is stuff that will also not affect every person. A lot of these things might happen to some people, but you can't say that all of this will happen to every single person. So please, just as I was telling people when the Lemonade album came out, which was before this podcast, please accept that this is entertainment, take it for what it is, which is entertainment, and move beyond it. Remember that all of this chaos is just very good writing and very acted out, and at the end of it, you kind of just have to shut shit off and go and touch some real grass. But anyways, with all of that said, I want to know your thoughts on it. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you watch it? Did you not watch it? And did you find whatever it is that I'm saying to be absolute bull? Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the breaktime podcast. On X, it is at bagakthed. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.